Welcome to Conversations Live. For more than a decade, we've brought you the best in books, entertainment, celebrity interviews, and current events. When the movers and shakers of the world have something to say to you, they say it to us first. Now celebrating 17 years of broadcasting success, here's your host, Cyrus Webb.
And welcome back, everyone, to Conversations Live. I'm your host, Cyrus Webb. Glad you all could join us once again, both for our radio audience here in Mississippi at WYAD 94.1 FM and WYADonline.com. We're glad that you all could be with us. Also, just tuning in to our online affiliates around the world, including our friends at iHeartRadio and Amazon Music Podcast. We're glad you all could be with us as well. We're excited to welcome back best-selling author Brendan Kiely to our program today. He's been able to give us some great books over the years, both fiction and nonfiction, and this year is no different. Today he's celebrating his brand-new thought-provoking release. It's called The OtherTalk, Reckoning with Our White Privilege. We're going to talk to Brendan not only about the writing of this new book, but also the conversations he hopes comes from it. Brendan, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it.
Cyrus, thanks so much for having me on. It's great to be back.
Hey, man, the pleasure is definitely all mine. And I should say, I first was introduced to you with Jason Reynolds, who wrote the introduction for this book. So it's great to be able to see how you all have continued to be able to not only to support each other, but also to share these great messages. So I know the book's just officially out today, but already the comments are already coming in, Brendan. What has it been like for you to see the way that people are responding to the OtherTalk?
I appreciate that, and by the way, I just want to say I appreciate you mentioning that Jason wrote the introduction because I waste no opportunity to not be able to share with folks how much I love that man and appreciate that man, and don't take our friendship at all for granted because it was born in serious conversation, and from that has grown joy and meaningful relationships. So thank you for starting that way. It means a heck of a lot to me. But with regards to your question, it's been pretty interesting actually to think about this because so I'm white for your listeners out there. I'm a white kid growing up in Massachusetts. I certainly had conversations about racism, but they were always about what was happening to other people, right? And for so many of my friends who are black or indigenous or are other folks of color, they grow up having an evolving conversation, kind of colloquially known as the talk, right, about navigating and trying to survive racism in America. And so for me, I wanted to write The OtherTalk because I wanted to reflect a bit more on what it means for white families to have conversations about our racial identity, how it impacts our lives, and it impacts the lives of others. And to the point of your question, as I've been traveling the country for the last few years, time and time again, young folks I meet, whether that's in Anchorage, Alaska, Orlando, Florida, or Portland, Maine, or so many points in between, young folks and young white folks really want to have this conversation. They want to learn more so they can do more. And so I'm grateful that I have the opportunity now with the OtherTalk to really engage directly in conversations about white privilege with every community that invites me to come in and talk about it.
And Brendan, I think to that point, I think the thing that I appreciated about this book, and I'd love to dive into it a bit with you, is that it is about facing what is not always comfortable and what is not always easy. I said in my review on Amazon this morning when I was writing it that you challenge us to be honest with ourselves. And one of the things that you did is kind of look at the makeup even of this country, and as much as we may say that there have been great things that have come from this country, I've benefited from that as well, looking at the institutions themselves and how they were rooted and who they were looked to be able to support as well as to disadvantage. How important is that talk for all of us to have, Brendan?
Yeah, absolutely. The structure of the book is I use examples from my own life to talk about here's what I didn't know at that time, and I wish I had known more. But also not only as a way to talk about some of the mistakes I've made along the way or misunderstandings I've had along the way, or moments where I needed to learn more, but how those moments in my life, thinking about myself as a white person, are connected to the larger, broader institutional, systemic, and structural racial problems in our country. I'll give you one example that I think connects specifically to what you're talking about. My grandfather grew up in an Irish immigrant household in western Massachusetts. He fought in World War II. When he got out from World War II, he was able to take advantage of the benefits of the GI Bill that enabled him to get college loans, home loans in rapidly developing and increasingly valuable neighborhoods and communities, in a way that his fellow veterans who were black and indigenous and other folks of color were not able to take advantage of in the same way. Now, that does not diminish all the hard work that my grandfather did to, pursue his degree in chemistry and to help be a mover and a shaker in the plastics industry and to provide for my father and his 5 siblings. I mean, that takes a lot of hard work, and I do not diminish that. And he benefited from those structural advantages, or we might call privileges, as a white person. That's okay to talk about. In fact, I think it's essential that we talk about, to the point of your question.
Yeah. There's a powerful chapter in the book, Brendan, and we can talk as little or as much as you'd like to about it. And it's chapter 11, Hard Look in the Mirror. And you're having this conversation, and the point that really got me was when you wrote, her hand shook as she lifted her finger and pointed it at my face. You're not white on the inside. I think, for a lot of people, there is, and I have to say, Brendan, my radio audience knows this, I didn't grow up, my family never had to talk with me. Growing up in Mississippi, of all places, you would have thought that would have been one of the things that I experienced. I didn't. So a lot of times when I have these conversations, it's really interesting to me because I hear a lot about the talk. I hear that. I have friends of mine whose parents did have the talk with them, and they were told certain things about how to, respond if, when it comes to law enforcement, different things, what not to do. And I never had those conversations. So when I first started hearing about this, I thought, wow, why did they have to do that? But what I've learned, and what it seems like you talk about in this chapter 11, is that there are people who have certain perceptions about people, and because of those perceptions, they can be judged a certain way. What did that do for you, to be told that you were not white on the inside?
Thank you for bringing this example up. I think, quite frankly, a lot of people want to shy away from this or not talk about this section of the book, and I'm grateful that you brought it up. And once again, I applaud you. This is why I always like talking to you. I'm fumbling right now because honestly, it was a really difficult part of the book to write. To be more specific, for the folks out there who are listening, it's about an interaction I had with someone who was a white supremacist, and outwardly so, and how uncomfortable the conversation was for me. Because what she was talking about, she was speaking a lot of the kind of rhetoric that is talking about how great and superior white people are and everyone else isn't. And it was incredibly uncomfortable for me for a couple of reasons. One, of course, I disagree with all of it. It's all hoo-ha, if I can say that, on the show. And it's also deeply, deeply dangerous to allow people to spread that kind of disinformation. But what also was immediately striking for me is, as much as I wanted to distance myself from her and say, well, I'm not like her, I hope no one looks at me and thinks that I think like her, she was doing the same thing to me. And that's what she was saying when she said, you're not white on the inside. She was saying, you're not one of us. What I recognized in that moment was that she and I were doing the same thing to each other. However, if that young white woman and I walk into a bank together, or try to get an Uber together, or are applying for a home loan in certain communities, we're going to actually share some of the same immediate advantages or privileges as white people in a majority racist world that makes us more similar than either one of us are comfortable admitting. And I think, to get to your question, I think that's part of why having these talks is so essential. No, maybe not everyone has had these kinds of talks about their racial identity in their families, but in my experience, more often it's the case that families of color have had conversations about how their racial identity impacts their lives, and more often than not, the case is that families that are predominantly white have not had those kinds of conversations, specifically about how their own racial identity impacts their lives and the lives of others. So thank you for bringing that moment up, because that was a scary moment. I was terrified.
Yeah.
It was in a school. So my first fear was, oh my God,
right.
What's the safety in place for all the students of color at this school? And then I wondered, who else do I need to talk to about this? Because we can't have disinformation like that being spread so easily.
Yeah, and you go a step further in the self-evaluation, which is what I thought was interesting, Brendan. For those who have the hardcover of the book, Brendan writes this on page 119 and talking about how it's people did, as you mentioned, you have teachers looking in a room, and what do they see? They just see two people talking, right? They don't know what you're talking about. But you write this, whether I like it or not, I'm privileged in all the same ways as a white supremacist, at least at first glance. And then you go on to say this, it is all too seductive for white people who aren't white supremacists to want to distance themselves from white supremacists. We think wildly, that's not me, that's not me. I hope no one from the global majority looks at me and thinks I'm anything like her. I'm not. But there's something not quite right about this. By saying that, it makes it easier for me to weasel out of taking any responsibility. I'm basically saying that racism is the white supremacist's fault, not mine. And so I don't have to take any responsibility for it. And I think that's why I said in my review on Amazon, Brendan, this conversation is so much bigger, I think, than black and white, because it really becomes about what's right and what's wrong. How much of that do you hope kind of comes out in these talks like this about the other talk?
Well, right. I thank you for that, because the point of the book is to try to inspire conversations within families, and again, within maybe many families who have not had these conversations. But I think young people in particular have an instinct for fairness. And if we as adults can be honest about all of these moments, like the one that you're talking about right now, we can feel inspired, and we can inspire our young folks to feel that sense of responsibility to help make the world a fairer place. I have to believe that we can make the world a fairer place because of all the people for generations before me who have been fighting to try to make our country and our world a fairer place. I think about all the people who were working in the civil rights movement. I think about all the people who were working post the failures of Reconstruction to try to make things fair. I think about the abolitionist movement and the people there who are trying to make things fair. If all those generations of people have been working so hard to make things fair, then I think it's my responsibility too, and hopefully young folks' responsibilities as well, to jump in and try to make the world a bit fairer, and to be clear about right and wrong, just as you're talking about in this question.
Yeah. I think that is the big thing here, and so I think, for our audience out there who are just now hearing about Brendan's new book, and Brendan, it's a powerfully written book, and I love the way that you are able to share real examples, including your own, and I think that's what I love about the striking cover, where you have reckoning with my white privilege and crossing that out and putting our white privilege, because it really, I think, is so much bigger than just looking at a certain group. Again, everyone, best-selling author Brendan Kiely has been our guest. The new book is The Other Talk, Reckoning with Our White Privilege. It's out literally today for those who are joining us live. You can get it through our friends at Amazon.com or your favorite local bookstore. And, Brendan, how can they stay connected with you?
Yeah, everyone can find me at www.brendankiley, BrendanKiely.com. You can find all my social media there. And, Cyrus, thanks so much for having me on. It's really a pleasure to be back.
Oh, the pleasure's definitely all mine, man. Looking forward to the next conversation with you for sure.
Excellent. Likewise.
All right. And we thank your audience for tuning in to another great segment of Conversations Live. Until next time, I'm your host, Cyrus Webb, saying as always, enjoy your day, enjoy your life, enjoy your world. Thank you all for choosing Conversations Live. And let's go make today amazing. Take care.